Hey guys, I'm here to get into Paul Thomas Anderson's perhaps most ambitious project he ever made. Seriously, like it's crazy because he's about every film he makes is something of an intimate epic. And I think this is the biggest in scope he's ever taken it. Because Magnolia is a very unhinged kind of film, and I think that the reason it's a little divisive in a sense is because I think it's extremely to the heart to an extent that the feeling is almost naive. But I think this is the kind of naive you want to treasure for the rest of your life, as opposed to just like the naive that can be cheesy or dated, because the thing about Paul Thomas Anderson is that this film, he was actually tapping into a lot of old-fashioned kind of themes. He's just exploring a lot of like characters who are just in a wide range of depth. It reminds me a lot of like so much of like Robert Altman stuff, but with like a completely more youthful lens. Like, this is a lot younger, but it's looking at death basically, themes of death, and kind of like finding something of a transcendence whenever you're in the face of death in yourself in a lot of ways, and how people literally kind of find each other. Some people have better faith than others, but it's like literally it feels like everything kind of organically happens the way it's meant to for like the fate of and the personality of the characters. You have some good-hearted guys who are people who are very lonely. Some people find some people don't, and then some people end up just feeling like terrible in the end. Because they had horrible actions. So I mean, it revolves around 8 different characters. So I mean, it's just some of the most interjecting directing alive. It feels like just like with Boogie Nights. I think Paul Thomas Anderson became more of a subtle kind of director after Magnolia, but here it's just like very ambitious and hyper. Like again, it's youthful, and I think I love it so much because this is a feeling and spirit that's always timeless, and it doesn't shy away. And that naivete isn't shying away from death and things of death. I think that's what makes naivete strong. It's like when it's fully aware of death and still able to kind of see a greater good of some sort. But yeah, it just feels like Paul Thomas Anderson kind of had a love for just like finding family within outsiders with Boogie Nights. So he wanted to explore this theme a little deeper. I mean, his father was literally dying from cancer. I think that's where all this emotional intensity was coming from. So like it almost felt like he was literally in a funeral while making this, in a sense. And this was literally like his kind of his kind of like just transcendence for like grieving his father in a lot of ways. I think making this film and just kind of like I think just deep diving into just other perspective, making your own world entirely. It's almost like detaching yourself from it and just literally just immersing yourself completely into the act of just creating the film itself. Like every single character here is quite perfect. I really love like all these different actors. Like you have the variety. It's like Tom Cruise is really an asshole. I mean, basically, he's just this cult leader who's crazy, and that's kind of the thing about Paul Thomas Anderson. He was very anti-cult leader because feeling a film director is by nature a bit of a cult leader feeling, but it's kind of just saying like don't do anything crazy with that whatsoever. Be very, very just chill about it and just figure out what you're doing for yourself. Yeah, don't feel like you're out to change the world. Literally, like Tom Cruise kind of portrays here, but of course, like all this comes from because he's literally like a leader for like really nasty subject matter. Like this is like right before the internet took over, so I imagine it's an interesting time of just like literally a perverted man just preaching to a bunch of just horny single men, basically, just how to kind of find some love, basically. Well, meanwhile, John C. Reilly is a character I really love. I mean, he really stands out to me as I remember seeing this in the year 2014, particularly, and this character really just kind of left a profound impact on me. That really changed me. This whole film really does come around and change my life a few times, it feels like. Because John C. Reilly is really a kind-hearted man, but he's very lonely. But he just meets this woman almost accidentally. This is almost, I think, deep down how I've always wanted to kind of meet a future girlfriend. Where I'm just out stumbling around and I just get into a slightly awkward situation, but and it's all really awkward about the whole film because she's like this kind of troubled drug addict, which makes sense when this whole story was. I mean, she had some horrible things, extremely horrible troubled family. Wow, he is just kind of like this naive cop. Like literally, he just they end up meeting like during like a noise, like calling the noise down, and he ends up falling. They end up kind of gradually kind of just developing feelings for each other. She runs away from it in a lot of ways, but he ends up coming back, which is perfect confidence right there. So I really love that in a lot of ways. It's very powerful, and it feels like Magnolia very much foreshadows so much of the 2000s dramas in particularly. I feel like a lot of dramas were kind of slowing down a little bit. Like it feels like Babel. It made me think of this a lot. Just more like a slightly more subtle, maybe refined take on what this is doing. Again, this is just a more youthful Robert Altman, it feels like. I mean, this is just uniquely very epic and also very intimate the entire way through. And it's the ultimate 3 hours that feels like an hour and a half. This film feels so short because it just sweeps you away like a grand opera would. I think that's what Magnolia does. And it's capturing this just wide variety, of just all kinds of characters. Literally, eight of these characters, they all kind of have something different about them. But it's like what makes them all connected is that in spirit, Like they kind of have something of a god in their lives. I mean, God presents himself throughout like the most subtle ways throughout this entire film. I think that's what's so interesting about it. You have all these references to Exodus 8:2, like with the number 82, like just literally over 100 references to the number 82 all over the film. Wow, you have um, I mean, just all kinds of references going on, especially with like the ending with the, this is how I first heard about Magnolia. I'd heard about this film way before I even knew who Paul Thomas Anderson even was. I didn't see any of his films before There Will Be Blood, but I remember when I was like, I think I was like 10 years old. I remember I had this game that was just like, this is how I was introduced to a lot of movies, as well as this movie book I had. I would just obsessively read these images when I got home from school and just stare at them all day and night, trying to figure out what these films are about and how excited I am to just kind of deep dive into all this stuff when I get older, and I can fully grasp maybe what all's going on here. But it feels like I would always see these. I had this game as well that would take me through these miscellaneous clips, and I remember there was just this extended scene of frogs falling around. I was obsessed with the movie Jaws when I was a kid, so I was just watching frogs. I was like, "Whoa, is this a disaster movie?" And I just started looking into it, and I remember talking to relatives who'd seen it, and they was just like, "Oh, it's just this drama that's amazingly entertaining, actually." But they all told me I was too young to get this film. I think that's what kind of stunk about it. Everyone was a little condescending to me about how this film was, so I didn't come to it until after I saw There We Blood, and then it literally changed my life. It's rated R, so to be fair, the subject matter is pretty intense for a 10-year-old, but and it's extremely in the face of death throughout a lot of this. Like you literally have two dying people, and then how it's like tragically affecting different types of people. Like Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is just like this modest nurse, while Tom Cruise is like the son of this father. They had the most hateful relationship. And that's what made Tom Cruise this kind of crazy, perverted leader asshole kind of guy. And then he's like breaking down, having all his most extremely tear-inducing moments. This is just Tom Cruise is on a genius plane this year. I mean, between this and Ice White Shot, worked with Stanley Kubrick and Paul Thomas Anderson. Tom Cruise is a genius actor. I love Tom Cruise. I really do. This is again, Magnolia's tone is a little over the top. I think that's what can rub some people off. Like I think Robert Altman perhaps is a little more subtle doing this with shortcuts, but I think I love these films equally. One of the hardest compare and contrast ever is Magnolia or Shortcuts, because they're literally equal. Magnolia is just getting straight to the heart. Sometimes you just need to get straight to the heart, in a way. And I think that sometimes that can be annoying or cheesy, but I think Paul Thomas Anderson just managed. I don't know how it happens. It's like that itself is always a mystique, but somehow he landed just the perfect platform here. And I think Paul Thomas Anderson was also looking at a lot of the 90s, and I think I just organically agree with a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson. And sometimes a lot of art in the 90s was just too nihilistic. I think I love David Lynch's take on this because it was a little sarcastic and over the top, like Lost Highway particularly. But Magnolia is different because Magnolia is looking at all that and just kind of looking at a call for old-fashioned emotional expressionism. Because I think in the end, Paul Thomas Anderson is the most influenced just by old films of all sorts. I mean, classic films of the 20th century, you could say. And that's what he's kind of putting right into this. It's like, because that's one of my favorite things about Paul Thomas Anderson. He has his own school. I think that's one reason he's probably the most important director to me in a sense, because he kind of did, I think, teach me the best way that like you are your own teacher. You're your own, kind of when it comes to the subject matter. So it's just like kind of an organic process of a person building themselves, finding it, a filmmaker, you could say, finding your own journey and finding the beauty and just having that being your life goal, to just have about numerous things to say to the world, just like all directors do. That's because that's the feeling, that's egotistical, but it's like you want to have the calmest possible way. That's the thing, even with a film like this, maybe it irritates people because it's a little, it's that naivete, but I think that it's the perfect balance of like an egotistical naivete without being like Billy Corgan overblown. This is like Paul Thomas Anderson does it just with absolute beauty and grace. It's like an epic, intimate. That feels kind of like a perfection is living inside a lot of this. Like it feels like, I feel like there had to be a lot of influence from stuff like the Beatles, like while making this film. It really reminds me a lot of that kind of that feeling and spirit, listening to the Beatles. But again, that's the 90s though. I think it's kind of funny how again, it's just like, I think Nirvana did it, grunge did it, but it was just like, basically ended just being different in towards everything that involves intense emotional expressionism. And I think it still lives around a lot of today. And I think that's something I also kind of don't like always, because sometimes you just need to get it out because it's like we have the freedom to do it. It's like it feels like a calling to like let yourself get it out sometimes. But I think that's what Magnolia is here to do. And Boogie Nights kind of has this too to an extent, but I think Magnolia is doing it more. This is just kind of a unique and modern kind of foundation of why extreme emotional expression needs to happen. Like Ingmar Bergman, particularly, is I think what this what this is. And Ingmar Bergman said this is one of the best films he'd ever seen, which is cool because this reminds me a lot of Fanny and Alexander in a sense. This is like a Paul Thomas Anderson, but Yeah, in the end, I see Fading Alexander. I think I prefer that slightly because I know that's actually an elderly man, in his final years. While Paul Thomas Anderson, I know he's young and he's got way more to go. So it's like this is a youthful outlook on death and just looking at old people facing death, but from a young person's perspective, basically. Yeah, like I said, this film does have that naivete. So, and it certainly can represent my own naivete very smoothly. So, but if that makes me naive, the fact that I love all this, it's like, hey, call me naive. I can take some of that. Because not all that is bad, as this film makes very clear. Paul Thomas Anderson films kind of make that clear, like that. Robert Altman too, like that naivete. David Lynch, for that matter, it's not all bad. Oh yeah, Magnolia is it's a masterpiece. It really does feel like it's a flower just organically blooming by way of just the spirit of the writing, which is one of the best screenplays I've ever read. I love sitting down and reading the screenplay on its own, honestly, because it's just one of the things. Same with Boogie Nights. There's something about those two screenplays. I love sitting down and just reading through those. Somehow with Punch Drunk Love Onward, I'd rather watch it though. Somehow sitting down and reading the script is not the same feeling. I tried with the master, and it did not. It somehow didn't feel right to me. That literally was meant to be told on the screen. Well, you can say Boogie Nights and Magnolia. Young Paul Thomas Anderson is perhaps almost at the dilemma, and this is a question I love to face. It's like, why am I making this into a film, basically? Why? And maybe Paul Thomas Anderson started to question himself that after making Boogie Nights. I think he was just, because this all feels very novelistic, extremely novelistic. Like, this could easily be into a novel. Punch Drunk Love Onward does not feel like it could be into a novel. Those feel like they all had to be films. It's just, Magnolia is just passionate, and all these actors just kind of give it, like, there's something like a loose kind of comedy feeling to it, almost just a feel-good spirit living into the melancholic. This has made me the best melancholic movie piece of all time, and it makes me feel like it is one of the best expressions that come out of 1999, which is, there was a lot of people at an interesting place. Paul Thomas Anderson, I think, just had, again, facing the death of his father, just broke him into, and making Boogie Nights. So he had the ego of Boogie Nights, and he had the heartfelt personal dilemma of, death. So it's like he just kind of went mad crazy while making Magnolia. So just building to the biggest thing ever possible, an expression of why life is worth living, and the question of, like, what's going to happen after 1999. A lot of people thought, I don't know, the internet was going to explode, the world's going to end. Like, a lot of conspiracies were seriously floating around this year. I mean, I put people in an interesting headspace. Paul Thomas Anderson was, again, he wanted to give love to the world in a Beatles-esque way. Wow, Stanley Kubrick wanted to crack some conspiracy codes, and David Lynch wanted to just be friendlier than ever before, and he ever had been. But yeah, everyone was different about it. Abbas Kiarostami had a beautiful take too. This one was pure simple. But this isn't a film I'm going to be in the mood for all the time now, because now I definitely can see the naivete in it, but it doesn't bother me, because that naivete is exactly what I would stand for. I think what he's kind of expressing here. But yeah, it's really one of the best films ever made. Again, it's getting into complicated stuff like guilt, regret, and just feeling bad about your past, basically, but finding forgiveness in the present so the future can move forward in a beautiful kind of way. And yeah, when I watch this film, somehow it does feel like Paul Thomas Anderson's really just eager to express a certain God in a way that might be a little more raw, it's like a late 90s, almost a Quentin Tarantino way of doing Ingmar Bergman, you could say. I don't know, it's a weird contrast, but a little Wes Anderson in there too, for that matter, but way looser, way more epic. Wes Anderson had a tighter scope. I think what Paul Thomas Anderson's looser by contrast. But yeah, I love all these things, and the frog scene's perhaps one of those magical moments, because I think that's one of the reasons this film is divisive. So it could feel like you just spent 2 hours and 40 minutes building up to a bunch of frogs waiting. It's the same thing that a lot of people could watch Shortcuts and say, really, too. But I mean, ultimately, what both of these films have in common is they both kind of end in a way of, like, it doesn't really tell you what's going on. So it's a little bit of it's quite a brain twist. It's literally just a weird transcendent thing happens suddenly to all these characters who are just in a state of melancholy, and they basically find peace in a certain way in Magnolia. In Shortcuts, it's more of like, I'll get this. I'll save it for Shortcuts time. That's a different film. This is Magnolia. Yeah, this is basically sharing that through all this, it's all right, basically, for all the characters. And like all the trauma, all the pain that they've felt for years, they all kind of come to a realization in the air that everything's okay, and that is what unifies humanity. And I think that's just kind of a true essence. It's like there is an essence of humanity and resonating in pain with other people, just kind of knowing you're not the only one suffering in a sense. So that's what can happen, and that's what can cause a lot of problems and emotional instability, when you start to feel like you're the only one suffering in a certain way. That's more lonely than anything. And some characters in this film do feel this way. I don't know. It's a kind of a light, like a bit of a tear. It's like I think I've heard someone kind of define this in Boogie Nights as like a tearjerker comedy, and I kind of can understand that in a lot of ways. But really, because it's so entertaining that it doesn't even feel that like dramatic to me to like just love this film endlessly. It just feels like it's very organic and very warm the entire way through. And it talks about how trouble from the past doesn't always leave you, but it doesn't stop you from having planning for a better future ahead and for your own kind of way, whatever that may be. It doesn't have to be this grand epic thing. It could be just something that makes you fulfilled. That's in the end what it has to be. That's what it is. Like, your own fulfillment. My fulfillment is just to see that director list a certain way. Like, building my own film resume for myself, literally. See what happens. Yeah, and then all this guilt stuff, like, I mean, you have scumbags in this film too. Like, I won't get into too many details since the film kind of says it, but both basically two of the men who are dying are literally, they were both kind of scumbags in their own kind of way too. They have treated people very, very poorly for about most of their lives, and you're kind of literally looking at it differently. Like, it feels like Jimmy's just so cynical; he's ready to go, but Earl's just kind of, I think, bonding with Philip Seymour Hoffman and finding something a little more hopeful than what it is. But yeah, I mean, yeah, all these characters go through something crazy, and apparently this film is made into a play. I think that's amazing. Like, I could easily see this going into a play territory, and I really love this kind of continuing foundation. And it also kind of deals with like the nature of another thing about spirituality is detecting coincidences. Kind of realizing that coincidences are a summation of like that can almost be a god speaking in itself, of just like that. Wow, because I think a lot of us have that. It's like, whoa, that's no accident that happened. Like that. There was something to that there. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the most. Magnolia is an original film. Like, again, it just feels like it's so different from the things Paul Thomas Anderson was doing and stuff like There Will Be Blood, Onward, Master, in tone, because this is just a lot more of like almost like a pop art album would be. It feels like a very music inspired kind of film. This and Boogie Nights both do. Like, it feels like a lot of music in the '90s, all more optimistic shades. I mean, there were some like almost like Bjork, you could say, a Bjork feeling. I mean, he was literally dating a Mean Man when he made this. So, perhaps, not a Mean Man. Oh, excuse me, Fiona Apple. He was dating Fiona Apple. Mean Man did the soundtrack. They did not date. Yeah, Paul Thomas Anderson, Fiona Apple, another pop art musician, who was influenced by like Kate Bush and stuff. I talk about someone. I think a lot of this stuff does kind of have a little bit of a Kate Bush feeling to it. Also, I agree with that. It feels like an angel's possessing this film in a lot of ways. Paul Thomas Anderson's letting an angel out this film and letting out all the chaos, just some of the most hyper directing ever, and hyper energy. I don't know, something about this film just does feel like that equivalent of being on a cloudy day and going into a library and building a project for a few hours. You start to feel a certain kind of way. And Magnolia is one of my all-time favorite films. And I think it's kind of shocking how much it makes you sympathize with Tom Cruise, because 100% all the things that make you hate him at first kind of feeling, you realize, okay, that came from that. So it makes sense, basically. You feel for him. So, the tragedy of it all. But honestly, Magnolia it's a perfect film. I mean, really, it's really just in a kind of in its own original entity that's different from other Paul Thomas Anderson films, because all the other ones are more subtle. This is just quite a maximalist expression of emotional energy, but done perhaps never better, maybe, for modern art. It feels like, it would only get more subtle. It would only get better. So that's Paul Thomas Anderson. It's a perfect film of Magnolia. I recommend this film to anybody who's up for the subject matter. Like I said, I was like 15 when I saw this, and I felt like it was such an organic, quiet kind of feeling for me. Like, it just left me kind of transcendent, made me want to go out and live. It's just what it does. It makes me want to live in a way. I've seen this numerous times, and I think when I see this film, it does feel like few films have more felt like, oh, I need this film. It just feels like, again, a young attitude towards death, and that's a foundation, and that exists, and I think that's a timeless foundation if you're out to always retain youthful enthusiasm in the end. And I will say, like, yeah, sometimes the mood for this film comes, and then sometimes the mood for like the film Shortcuts. The reason I always connect to contrasting is they literally do feel like some 3-hour epics set in LA of just characters who are in a melancholic state, basically. But Shortcuts is more characters. That's more cynical. Contrast. I'll review that too. That's equally perfect film. I recommend Magnolia strongly. It's quite a perfect film. Its own right entirely.